You're 26, standing in a grocery store aisle, holding two identical boxes of pasta, and you realize that you have no idea who you are. Not existentially, not in a philosophy class way, just factually, like the information is somewhere, you just can't find the file. You did everything right. Finished school, got the job or the degree or the thing people said would make the next thing make sense, and now you're here, under humming lights, feeling like a background character in your own life. Everyone else seems to have a cart with a purpose. Yours has pasta and a low-grade sense of dread. This isn't depression. It's not laziness. It's not a personality flaw dressed up in a sad outfit. This has a name, a mechanism, and a timeline. And nobody put it on the syllabus. Nobody mentioned it in the orientation. Nobody slid a pamphlet under the door. Most people who go through this spend years convinced they're uniquely broken, that everyone else graduated into clarity while they were held back for reasons they can't quite identify. They aren't broken. They're on schedule. A very specific psychological schedule that explains almost everything they've been doing for the last 2 years. The part nobody warns you about isn't the crisis itself. It's what your brain does to hide it from you while it's happening. You refresh your LinkedIn, not because you're job hunting, just because it's there. Seeing someone from your graduating class rise through the ranks can be inspiring. You're not sure what. Validation or dread, roughly 50-50. Sometimes both at once in a combination that doesn't have a name. You have a running list, mental, never written, of things you should probably figure out. It's been piling up for about 3 years. The list is long. You have never opened it. You know this. You don't open it anyway. You start hobbies with the energy of someone who has finally found the answer. Pottery or running or learning a language, something with aesthetic potential. You tell 1 or 2 people about it with a conviction that feels real. Then the hobby starts requiring consistency instead of just identity, and it quietly stops. The supplies stay in the corner. You don't throw them away because that would be admitting something. You go home for a holiday, walk through the front door, and within 40 minutes you've become a slightly younger, slightly smaller version of yourself. You fall into old speech patterns. You make the same jokes. You slip back into the family role like it was waiting for you in a drawer. The drive home afterward has a specific texture, like you left something at the house but have no idea what it was, and no good reason to go back for it. You have a detailed fantasy about a completely different life. Different city, different job, maybe different name. Not dramatically, just subtly different, like a version of you that made slightly better decisions at a fork you can't quite locate. This fantasy has more texture than your actual plans. Your actual plans don't exist. You tell people you're figuring things out. You say it with a tone that sounds like it's going well, casual, unbothered, almost confident. Your stomach drops a little every time. Not a lot, just enough that you notice. Every single one of those behaviors points to the same thing. Something your brain is doing that isn't personal, isn't pathological, and is, honestly, happening on schedule. Tuesday night. Not even a bad one. You're on your couch at 11 p.m. in a city you picked because, well, you thought it would make you into someone. Your phone lies face down beside you. Around 8, you had this whole plan to do something tonight. Something that mattered. You can't pinpoint when you gave up on it. It just evaporated, and now you've been staring at the ceiling fan for an hour and a half. There's a group chat you haven't opened. It's not that you hate these people, it's that answering means being the breezy version of you. The one who cares about restaurant recommendations and responds with the right emoji. I don't know if I believe that person exists right now, so the notification sits there. That little red dot. I'm not ignoring it. I'm just not there yet. I'm not sad. That's not the word. Not happy either. It's more specific than that. I can't find myself, and looking is exhausting, and what makes it worse is that from the outside, this looks like nothing. Just someone sitting down. Totally fine. Somewhere in my head there's a question I can't shape right. Is this it? Or is this just before it? I don't know which answer I want. Both scare me. Neither one comes. The fan keeps going. I keep watching. That's where this ends. Nothing gets fixed. The fan spins. What's happening in that apartment on that Tuesday has a name. 2 names, actually. Identity foreclosure followed by identity moratorium. 2 consecutive phases where you trash the old map and refuse to draw a new one until you're goddamn ready. Not because you broke, because something's finally working right. Most people think the foreclosure phase means they failed. The old identity, student, achiever, person with a plan, someone who knew what came next, just stops working. Everything built on top of it becomes structurally unsound almost overnight. The scaffolding falls. What's left is just you, which turns out to be way more ambiguous than the scaffolding let on. The moratorium phase is what Ceiling Fan Tuesday actually is. Your brain runs a background audit. It goes through values, attachments, and self-concepts. What you said you believed versus what you actually feel. It won't commit to anything new until it's done. It's not frozen, not broken. It's doing the thing it's supposed to do, loudly and inconveniently, which is exactly how necessary processes work. Best way to picture it, your brain during identity moratorium is a GPS that lost signal. It hasn't crashed. It's not giving up. It's recalculating. And it will not give you a new route until it knows exactly where you are. Rushing doesn't help. Yelling doesn't help. It finishes when it finishes. That stuck feeling? It's your brain refusing to let you lock into an identity you didn't actually pick. Not the one your parents wanted, not the one you pieced together from what everyone seemed to expect, the one you'd choose if no one was watching. That's not broken. It's just deeply, incredibly inconvenient integrity. You're not stalled because something's wrong with you. You're stalled because the old version of you ran on external scaffolding, deadlines, institutions, someone else's calendar of when things should happen, and that scaffolding just collapsed. What you're sitting in now isn't a void. It's the first real conversation you've had with yourself since you learned how to dodge it. The quarter-life crisis isn't a crisis about your life. It's a crisis about your self-concept. Your life is just where it's happening. That distinction matters more than it sounds. Everything you've tried to fix, the job, the city, the relationship, the new routine you started on a Monday and abandoned by Thursday, was aimed at the wrong target. You were trying to solve a geography problem when you had a cartography problem. The map was wrong. Changing the territory doesn't fix that. The actual mechanism underneath all of it, when external scaffolding gets removed, the brain has to generate internal self-definition for the first time. Most people in their mid-20s have never actually done that, not really, because they never had to. There was always a next step, a next institution. The next thing someone else decided was supposed to happen now. You didn't lose yourself in your 20s, you just met yourself for the first time without a syllabus. And it turns out you're a lot to handle. Most people will either recognize that immediately or spend 3 days quietly furious that it applies to them. Either response belongs in the comments. The crisis isn't the problem. The crisis is the process, which means there's something it's supposed to do, and it hasn't finished yet. The objection forming right now is reasonable. It sounds like an excuse for not having things figured out. People in previous generations didn't have quarter-life crises. They just got on with it. Got married, got a job, built a life, and didn't sit on a couch staring at a ceiling fan having feelings about it. That's worth taking seriously because it's partially right. Previous generations didn't name it, didn't discuss it, didn't make videos about it. They moved through prescribed identity structures quickly enough that the moratorium phase had no room to breathe. The crisis existed. The permission to be in it didn't. Those are two completely different things. What's changed isn't human psychology, it's the length of the runway. Extended education, delayed traditional milestones, a vastly larger menu of possible identities and possible lives. The brain has more to process, more time to do the processing, and fewer external structures pushing it toward a decision before it's ready. The moratorium phase gets longer, louder, and more visible. Not because this generation is weaker, because the conditions are different. This is for you specifically, not the general case. The fact that previous generations just got on with it is not evidence that it worked. It's evidence that they didn't have the luxury of stalling. Functionality and health are not the same metric. They were fine, and they were fine are different sentences depending on which word you're stressing. The objection is valid. The conclusion it tends to reach, that the crisis is optional, performative, or a product of having too many choices, isn't. What it actually costs when the process goes unrecognized is what comes next. What happens to people who move through the moratorium phase without ever naming it, without ever understanding what's actually going on? They make decisions, big ones, permanent-ish ones, and they make them from the foreclosed identity, the one that was already collapsing, because it was the only self they had available at the time. They pick careers that the old version of them was supposed to want. They stay in cities they moved to as someone else, for reasons that made sense to someone they no longer are. They end relationships, good ones sometimes, because they can't distinguish between "this isn't working" and "I don't know who I am inside this," which are not even close to the same problem, but feel identical from the inside. 3 years later, 5 years later, they describe a persistent feeling of misalignment, like living in a life that fits like a shirt bought for someone they used to be. Nothing is catastrophically wrong. Nothing is right either. There's just this gap between who they are now and the shape of the life they're living, and no good explanation for how it got there. The more dangerous version isn't the person who stalls, it's the person who skips the moratorium entirely, cramming a new identity into the space, a new city, a new aesthetic, a new relationship, a new passion. The energy is real. It always is. But 18 months in, it starts feeling hollow in a way they can't explain and don't want to examine too closely. What accumulates quietly over all of this, across several rounds of choices that didn't hold, is a kind of self-mistrust. Not dramatic, not loud. Just a background suspicion that their own judgment can't be relied on, which makes the next time around more frightening rather than less. The moratorium phase becomes harder to stay in because the last time they stayed in it and made a choice, and it still didn't work. So what's the point of going through all of that again? What gets saved, the thing that actually changes the trajectory, isn't handling the hard moments. It's on Tuesday nights. The ceiling fan. The specific, uncomfortable texture of being someone who can't locate themselves and doesn't know yet that that's allowed. Recognizing that as a process rather than a flaw is the difference. Not a dramatic difference. Just the one that matters. Everything gets quieter here. The observations stop. What's left is just this. The quarter-life crisis isn't an interruption of your development. It is your development, finally happening on your own terms, your own timeline, instead of someone else's schedule with someone else's definitions of what comes next. The instinct, the strong, completely understandable instinct, is to get through it, to reach the other side, to convert the discomfort into motion, into decisions, into anything that looks like progress from the outside. But what actually works? Staying inside it long enough to let the audit finish, which means sitting with not knowing without immediately reaching for something to fill it. That's harder than it sounds and more useful than almost anything else you could be doing. Most people don't experience the end of a quarter-life crisis as a revelation, not as a morning they wake up knowing who they are. It comes as a quiet reduction in noise. One day, without announcement, you notice you're slightly less at war with where you are. That's it. That's the whole thing. Smaller than you expected, somehow more real because of it. You're not behind, you're between. Those are different locations. Nobody warns you about the quarter-life crisis because the people who made it through mostly remember it as right before they figured their shit out, which sounds kind of beautiful when you're looking back. When you're in it, though, you're just drowning. Memory lies to you like that. The actual experience doesn't. The ceiling fan was always just a ceiling fan. The question underneath it was always about you. And look, that question doesn't disappear. It just stops screaming at you once you've actually started answering it. If you made it to the end of this video, congratulations. You now know slightly more about your own crisis, which either helps or makes it worse depending on how deep in you are right now. Subscribe if you want me to keep calling out your brain stuff for free. Beats whatever 200-month thing you were about to sign up for.